is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the lives of Christopher Chant, chapters 18 and 19. In these chapters, Uncle Ralph decides that he's going to start taking matters into his own hands. And by matters, I mean Gabriel DeWitt's lives, and by taking into his own hands, I mean throwing them around different universes. These two chapters are some of the most fun I've had reading in a long time. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Huge thank you to Patricia for commissioning this book. It has been super fun. Ashley's in the chat. Don't worry about it. These things happen. I'm sure everyone understands. Yeah, guys, I was supposed to record something before. Long story short, I got my books mixed up and read the wrong thing for today. But thankfully, that did not happen to this episode. I read the right thing for this one. Guys, I have a confession to make. Sometimes there are things that I read for Spoil Me that I have a hard time getting through. And I really want to make it clear when I say have a hard time getting through. I don't even mean that it's not fucking amazing writing. For example, the Broken Earth series is some of the best writing I've ever read, and some of the most intense, relevant themes I have come across in fiction, period, science fiction especially. But it is heavy. It is intensely emotional, and sometimes because of that, really draining. Or there will be things that are just really dense in terms of the plot, like the Witcher series, which there's so much to keep track of and so many names and yada, yada, yada. And so it's a thing that I run into that I will have a hard time with, like, feeling excited to, like, start another section of reading sometimes, because I only just got my brain all set for my read through of the next 50 pages of Broken Earth, and now I have to completely, like, move the axis of my understanding for a different book that comes from a totally different perspective, that has very different, like, themes, plots. They have magic also, but their use of magic is different, and it can be just tiring because of the constant shifting around of what the author is trying to say and the worlds that you have to remember the rules for and all of that. It's never actually a bad thing, but it is really a challenge. I mean, I have said this before. Right now, for Spoil Me only, I am covering 18 different properties right now, which is part of why I'm not accepting bookings for new stuff until I finish some of the stuff that's already been commissioned, because it's just so many things to keep track of. But this book is kind of like you just ate a bunch of salad and roast beef and mashed potatoes and chowders and all this, like, really dense and good, but dense and heavy food. And then somebody gives you a bowl of really freshly made strawberry ice cream. And it's just like, oh, this is lovely. And that's how this book is to me. It is just super fun. There are occasional serious themes, but they never feel like it's something that I need to it's not that I'm not invested, it's that I don't feel the author needs me to be particularly invested in the emotional aspects. And the style of writing, for me, is the comfort food aspect, where it's just a really familiar voice, even though I had not read Diana Wynne Jones until, last year. And so I'm sad to say that this is going to be the second to last episode, I'm pretty sure, for this book, because I have really enjoyed this one. And this particular couple of chapters is so loaded with delightful, outright funny moments that I was sitting next to Owen and he was reading a comic and I kept giggling to myself, and I think I was kind of annoying him because it was distracting. But I couldn't help it because there are so many really funny moments. So, all right, let's start off with the less funny moment, which is Uncle Ralph deciding to, fuck shit up, pretty much. So we start off with Gabriel DeWitt, the Crestomancy, and he is leaving, apparently to, head to court or something with all of his people. It's whatever it is that they're doing. I'm not sure if they're, about to go and, make some arrests, or if they're going to, make a report. But all of his friends are very, serious, dressed kind of soberly, and they're getting gathered around a 5-pointed star that's drawn in the ground, or in the marble of the floor. And this is super, super fun. So Christopher and Millie, as she is now known, they are hiding under an invisibility spell, trying to make sure that everybody's gone by the time they decide to come downstairs. Throgmorton, for his part, keeps following Millie, but he will not stay close enough to them for him to be included in the invisibility spell. So they just kind of have to hope that nobody notices Throgmorton's actually following somebody, and they just think that he's walking around of his own accord. So Gabriel reached the hall and took a look around to see that all his troops were ready. He pulled on a pair of black gloves and paced into the center of the 5-pointed star, where he went on pacing, growing smaller and smaller and further away as he walked. Miss Rosalie and Dr. Simonson followed and began to diminish too. The others went after them 2 by 2. When there was only a tiny distant black line of them, Christopher said, "I think we can go now." So they begin to come downstairs. They're still covered with the invisibility spell. But all of a sudden, flames burst out of the star. And they're greenish purple. And there is a smoke coming with them that smells terrible. And all of a sudden, almost everybody who tried walking into the star with the Crestomancy, they all start coming right back out again. And it says, Miss Rosalie stumbled, pulling Flavian by one arm. Following them came Dr. Simonson, dragging a screaming sorceress, Beryl, Christopher thought her name was. By this time, he was standing stock still, staring at the utter rout of Gabriel's troops. Singed and wretched and staggering, all the people who had just set off came pouring back through the gap in the flames and backed away to the sides of the hall with their arms in front of their faces, coughing in the green smoke. Gabriel looked and looked, but he could not see Gabriel DeWitt anywhere among them. So at this point, Uncle Ralph comes out, and I love this line so much. Rather sadly, he wished that he had known more about people when he first met Uncle Ralph. He had a foxy, shoddy look. Christopher knew he would never admire someone like Uncle Ralph now. Y'all, if that isn't the realest shit, and just the simplicity of the sentence, he wished he had known more about people when he first met him. Look, I think anybody who has grown up, really grown up, knows that feeling. Anybody who has gone through the horror of the dating pool knows that feeling. Just when I was younger, there were a couple of guys that I expressed interest in, whom my mother took one look at photos of them and was just like, no, that's a fuckboy. And at the time, I was kind of like, it wasn't even that I didn't believe her, because I kind of knew she was right, but I was like, how do you know? And now I know how she knows. You just start to learn what fuckboys look like. And they don't all look the same. I can't tell you a fuckboy has this kind of hair, a fuckboy wears these kinds of clothes. You just see it in the eyes, the fuckboy eyes. And that's what's happening with him, with Uncle Ralph. He's like, oh shit, I should have seen it. It's too late now, but there it is. And it's the worst feeling because it's so clear to you at that moment. And you know you were using your best judgment that you had at the time. You were using the information that you had at the time to make the best decision that you could at the time. But now it is so blindingly obvious that this person ain't shit that you just want to go back and like talk to yourself and be like, girl, how do I tell you? Don't do this. And there is no help to be had because anybody could have said anything to Christopher about Uncle Ralph, and all it would have done was serve to make Christopher dislike the messenger. He would have been like, no, Uncle Ralph's great, and if you don't like him, I don't like you. And that's what happens, right? Especially if you're dating a guy who's a fuckboy and all your friends can tell, but you can't, and they all start to give you attitudes about this guy that they don't really like, you start to be like, well, maybe you guys are just assholes. Maybe all of you are just kind of ganging up on me, rather than thinking about the fact that maybe they all see something you don't. And the fact that they are all in accord and you're the only one who isn't means something. So I just, that one line and the sort of heartbreak, because it says rather sadly, there is it's not just the sadness of knowing that you should have made a different choice. It's the sadness of somebody letting you down. You know, it's the sadness of somebody that you admired who was really the one person in your life that you admired, because Christopher really doesn't have anybody. It's that feeling of like, God damn it. I thought I'd found someone and they weren't anything either. And that is just really tough, you know. It leads to some good things because Christopher's starting to get it. But I just thought it was so moving, even though it's a kind of almost throwaway line. So they are in the middle of like arguing with each other, Uncle Ralph and Christopher, because Uncle Ralph is basically telling Christopher, you're going to come and fucking work for me now. Christopher's like, no, I'm not. What are you fucking talking about? No, I'm not. And Uncle Ralph tosses something at him. It says a long, limp, transparent shape that was unquestionably Gabriel DeWitt's. That's his 8th life there. I did that with those weapons you brought me from Series 1, Christopher. This one works a treat. I spread the rest of his lives out all over the related worlds. He won't trouble us again. And the other weapons you brought me work even better. I had them all set up to meet DeWitt's folk and took the magic out of them in a twinkling. None of them can cast a spell to save their lives now. So there's nothing to stop us working together just like the old days. What? And he says, you're unmasked. All these people standing here know you were my main carrier now. You have to work with me or go to prison, and I'm moving into this castle with you to make sure of it. And then, who comes to the rescue? Throgmorton, the MVP, the cat. That's where it's at. This cat is not here to play. And I really want him to get a hold of Uncle Ralph. I don't know who gets revenge. Somebody has to like either kill or equalize in some way Uncle Ralph. But let it be known, I want it to be Throgmorton. And I love the fact that Christopher specifically tells Throgmorton at one point, you know that he wanted you cut up into pieces, right? Like, not that Throgmorton didn't already dislike this guy, which is very, very clear from his reaction. But he adds that little bit on top of it. You can cut him into pieces if he shows up again. I just love it. Because honestly, I was so horrified by him casually talking about cutting this cat up that getting it to this point, even if Throgmorton isn't the one who takes him out, it's still pretty satisfying. So it was clear Uncle Ralph would not get past Throgmorton in a hurry. Christopher stood up to find himself and the goddess inside a ring of Gabriel's dejected helpers. So Dr. Simonson, for the record, he is I don't want to say he's useless, but he's one of those, like, kind of egghead types that always has some shit to say, but never really has, like, a solution. He's one of those people that's very free with bringing up problems that they're facing, but doesn't, he will just state the problem and sort of throw his hands up and then be like, you figure it out. And there's always a sort of air to him that implies he doesn't think it can be figured out. You know what I mean? I cannot stand this type of person. Like, Dr. Simonson turns out to be mostly okay a little bit later on, but I was really losing my fucking patience with him because people who do this, who just say a problem and act like there's no solution. I mean, we all have our moments where we just want to vent and somebody giving us solutions is not really welcome because it's not why we're here. We just want to tell you how frustrated we are with the world and the things that are going on. And you constantly being like, why don't you do this? Or you could just do that. Isn't really what we're after with this conversation. That's not the same thing as being this type of person, though, all the time. There are just some people, there's, I think, a combination of things going on. They get stymied by problems, so they aren't people who are good problem solvers because they get so overwhelmed by anxiety that they sort of can't process anything past, this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the problem, over and over again. But then I think there's also an aspect of them enjoying having the power to instill an emotion in other people. And they don't care what that emotion is. It tends to be hopelessness and despair or sadness or frustration or anger. But they don't really care. There is something about them that gets off on the attention they get when they make these big grand announcements about things that are impossible to overcome, whether it's actually true or not. And I've met a few people like that really seemed to enjoy the effect they had when they made these big sweeping statements of powerlessness or helplessness. And I don't get it because I'm just so not that type of person. I tend to be pretty practical. So if there is a problem that I've tossed around in my head and I really can't come up with a solution to it, I have learned in some ways to be able to let go of that problem, but I have to toss around a lot before I'm willing to do that. I am usually a person who gets lists, figures out different approaches to things, and explores all of the options, and then according to a really, by the facts, systematic crossing out of this isn't as good, comes to my one solution. And that is, I tend to be somebody who takes a lot longer than average to decide on something. I can be very indecisive. But once I have decided, that's it. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I have thought it over and I know what I want and I have ruled out everything else. And that turns out to be what Christopher is like in this situation. And I love this reveal because I have liked Christopher throughout most of this book. For example, much more than I liked Cat in the previous Diana Wynne Jones book, the Charmed Life. Cat in that was he was likable in that he didn't actively go out and cause harm, but he was very foolish and short-sighted and didn't put two and two together and didn't really seem to have much of a personality besides being kind of sulky and desperate a lot of the time. Christopher has been really fun to hang out with. He starts off at a real disadvantage because of having shitty parents and having this frustrating upbringing that's very neglectful. But as he grows and changes, he starts to meet other people and be open to new experiences, whereas Cat has this sort of vibe of not really wanting anything to change, even though he's not particularly happy. So I was really enjoying seeing how Christopher made friends at school and got interested in a sport and just really started to try and make the best of what he had. And I'm very gratified here to see that he is discovering a talent that he never would have found if it hadn't been for an emergency situation. Emergency situations do this. They bring out the best and worst in people. I have found mostly in emergency situations that I'm pretty good at keeping my head because of the fact that I'm pretty practical. That's not always the case. I will freely admit there have been a couple times where there's been requirements for fast thinking, especially fast like physical response, and my brain just completely short circuits and I freeze and I don't know what to do. That tends to not really be the rule, but it can happen. And he really shines here. And it takes a minute for him to be allowed to do that. Because Dr. Simonson is basically really angry at Christopher. That's the first, he says, Gabriel's gone and we're left with this brat, who turns out to be the little crook I always suspected he was, and not a spell to rub together between us. I really, damn. I know because of what Flavian said to Christopher, how everybody else sees him, but I didn't realize it was quite this harsh. Even though Flavian was really mean and talks about how insufferable he is, this still came as a surprise. And even Rosalie says something about how Christopher says he's not working for him anymore. Dr. Simonson says, this motherfucker will say anything. Don't you believe him? Which I was like, damn, all right. So Christopher, he decides that he's going to walk off with Millie because they're still talking about him as if he's not there and arguing amongst themselves. So he doesn't even at this moment have to really worry until they decide what they want to do. So he's resolved to go and free Tacroy and just go on doing what he thinks he needs to do until such time as he has to worry about these guys. So he goes in there and Tacroy is being held in some pretty intense spells. He uses his witch sight to be able to see that Tacroy is knee deep. There's spells knee deep all across the floor, strands of spells across the doorway, and it says Tacroy himself was inside a perfect mass of other spells, intricately knotted over him, particularly around his head, which he describes later as having his soul in a net bag, or his spirit, and just being horrible to experience, on an almost physical level. So Christopher tasks Millie with taking care of getting rid of a bunch of the spells that are out around the room, while he works on freeing Tacroy specifically. And I love that Millie goes and gets a broom and sweeps a bunch of the spells out in gets it's just such a weird, sort of almost banal handling of we're gonna just get a broom and sweep them out. I just find that really fun. So Millie stops and looks at Tacroy, and she says, "You're like Christopher and me, aren't you? There's a part of you that's somewhere else." Tacroy's face flushed a sudden red. Christopher could feel sweat on it under his fingers. Very surprised, he asked, "Where is the rest of you?" He saw Tacroy's eyes swivel towards his imploringly. "Series 11, don't ask any more. Don't ask me. Under these spells, I'd have to tell you, and then we'd all catch it." He sounded so desperate that Christopher considerately did not ask any more, though he could not resist exchanging a look with the goddess, and worked until he got that knot undone at last. It proved to be the key knot. The rest of the spell at once fell away in dissolving strands around Tacroy's handmade boots. So, that's interesting. I don't know what to make of that. Is it supposed to be, when Millie says part of you is somewhere else, like me? When she says that, I'm assuming that Christopher is saying, when she starts to say part of you is somewhere else, I'm thinking she means Christopher because he has multiple lives and one of them has been taken away and locked in a safe. But she says, me and Christopher. What part of her is somewhere else? Is she split into multiple lives? I didn't think that was... I don't really understand what that even means. So, at that moment, all of the adults come into the room. And you kind of, I at least, expected them to yell at Christopher for freeing this guy. That was part of the Wraiths. And instead, Miss Rosalie says, "Christopher, We're going to have to ask you to take over as the next Crestomancy, at least for the moment. And Christopher is just like, yeah, I mean, we knew that was going to happen. And I'll do it, but two things. I want Tacroy freed. I don't want him arrested. And secondly, I want Millie to be the one that helps me the most, and I want her to get her boarding school paid for that she wants to go to. And nobody even asks who she is, where she came from. Nobody asks anything. Like, later on, there's the whole thing with the arm of a chef, and nobody asks about that either. And I am dying to know what they think is going on with Millie, because there's no question about what are these people here? What are they doing? Why, like, how did this strange girl just pop up? So I'll be looking out for when that gets dealt with. So they go out into the hall, and Christopher says that he wants them to summon everybody. Butlers, cooks, housekeepers, gardeners, stable people. They get everybody gathered together in the same hall where Throgmorton is standing and staring at the tiny little hole that Uncle Ralph could potentially materialize through. Tacroy ran to a cupboard under the staircase and came back with an armful of queer candles in star-shaped holders. He showed Christopher and the goddess where to put them and what words to say, and they do this like spell that's meant to sort of contain him. And then it says that Throgmorton's tail twitched scornfully. And Tacroy says, the cat's right. This would stop most people, but with the amount of dragon's blood your uncle has stored away, he could break through any time he wants. I love that. His tail's twitched scornfully, and Tacroy says, the cat's right. I love it. It's like he's just having the conversation, but all he does is move his tail. So, we'll catch him when he does, said Christopher. He knew what he would do himself if he knew that Throgmorton was lying in wake, and he was fairly sure Uncle Ralph would do the same. He suspected their minds worked the same way. If he was right, it would take Uncle Ralph a little time to get ready. By this time, quite a crowd of people had come into the hallway. And there's a lot of people who just look really bummed out because they don't have their magical ability anymore. Then there are people that just look mystified for being called here. And he calls out, hands up for everybody who can do magic. Then he says, hands up anyone who can do woodwork or metalwork. And then he says, we've got two things to do. We've got to keep my uncle out of here until we're ready to catch him, and we've got to get Gabriel DeWitt back. And Christopher is actively thinking to himself, as he says this, I'm not even sure that's possible. But when he says it out loud, everybody sort of perks up, because they're kind of trusting him when he says this is possible, that it is. And he sort of thinks to himself, like, even if it turns out it's not possible, it's clearly good for their morale to think it's possible, so I'm going to go out on a limb and pretend for now that I'm totally sure we can do this. My uncle didn't kill Gabriel, he just scattered all his lives. We'll have to find them and put them together. But first, I want a birdcage thing made big enough to cover the pentacle and hung from there so that it can be triggered by a spell to come down over anything that tries to get through. He pointed to Dr. Simonson. You're in charge of making it. Collect everyone who can do woodwork and metalwork, but make sure some of them can do magic too. I want it reinforced with spells to stop anyone breaking out of it. And Dr. Simonson gives like a mocking bow and says, it shall be done. Christopher supposed he deserved that. The way he was behaving would have had the last governess accusing him of having a swelled head. But then he was beginning to suspect that he worked best when he was feeling bumptious. I have never heard this word, guys. He was annoyed with the last governess for stopping him realizing this before. So, bumptious, I'm making sure that I'm actually, like, pronouncing this correctly as well. It's spelled B-U-M-T-I-O-U-S. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this word. Yeah, it looks like bumptious is the way you say it. Self-assertive or proud to an irritating degree. I am 100% bumptious. I adopt this word as my child and patronus. I can't believe I have never heard it before, considering what I'm like. And I love the fact that he's realizing this feeling makes him better at his job, because guess what? It usually does. When you are somebody who needs to be in a leadership position, you need to have that a little bit, because people can sense whether or not you have confidence in what you're saying. And if you don't, they can pick up on it and they decide not to fucking listen to you. This is genius. I can't believe I didn't know about this damn word. So he says, and before anyone starts on the birdcage, the spells around the grounds need reinforcing, or my uncle will try to bring the Wraith organization in that way. I want everyone except Tacroy and Millie to go around the fences and walls and hedges, casting every spell they can keep of to keep people out. Now, again, this is what I love. The gardeners and the housekeepers and everybody are like, look, dude, we want to help, but our magic is pretty much just like growing plants, making like little charms to like clean things a little bit more easily. The cook is like, I'm really good at making excellent food, but like, how do you, what? And Christopher is like, guys, holy shit, use your heads, have a little imagination. Can you grow cactuses, bushes with spines, 10-foot nettles on them? And this gardener, the head gardener, who's like an older guy, sort of starts to smile and be like, oh shit, yeah. And thistles and poison ivy. And you can practically hear Christopher being like, yes, yes, give it to me, more of that. Then when the chef speaks up, he's like, well, can't you reverse being good at food? Poison the walls, hang rotten steaks and moldy soufflés on them. Here comes, this part was one of the first parts where I actually laughed out loud. He's saying moldy soufflés on them. Not since my student days have I, the cook began indignantly, but this seemed to bring back memories to him. A wistful look came over his face, which was followed by a gleeful grin. I will try, he said. I love it. This is what I'm talking about, guys. Getting back to thinking like children. That is what it's about sometimes. You just gotta have some imagination. We're pulling a fucking Kevin McAllister here. We're just, this is my house. I have to defend it. So then comes the housemaid. We can only do little things, charms and sendings and the like. Well, go and do them, as many as you can, Christopher said. A wall is built brick by brick, after all. If you can't think what charms to work, consult my assistant Millie. She's full of ideas. And then the second part that I laughed out loud at. The goddess grinned. So did the boob boy. From the look on his face, he was full of appalling notions which he could hardly wait to try. Christopher watched the boot boy troop out with the gardeners, the cook, and the maids, and rather envied him. He beckoned Flavian over. Flavian, there's still loads of magic I don't know. Would you mind standing by to teach me things as they come up? Well, Mordecai could do that just as well. Yes, but I'm going to need him to go into trances and look for Gabriel's lives, said Christopher. Are you indeed? Said Tacroy. And Gabriel's going to burst into tears of joy when he sees me, isn't he? I'll go with you, said Christopher. And everybody else, basically, because at this point Christopher assures him, I'll go with you. But later on, everyone's like, no, sir, you should not go. You are way too vulnerable when you leave your body. The other life that you have as backup is going to be locked in a cage. So if something happens to you, you aren't going to have access to it because Gabriel's gone. No. You need to stay firmly here, which I think they are correct in saying. Sorry. Ashley is chatting here. A fluffy meringue of a book, indeed. Is it short for rumbumptious, maybe? I don't know what rumbumptious is, but let me know. That sounds amazing. I feel like I've only ever heard it used for babies and toddlers, though. Oh, I never heard that. I'm fine with it, though. So, the next 24 hours were the busiest Christopher had ever spent. And there is just so much going on. Everybody is like, being called to their particular strengths to help in the ways that they know how. And this is what I'm talking about. There's another book series that I had been covering, and it has been a minute. I'm hoping that it doesn't get dropped. The first book was Grace of Kings, which was amazing. And the second book is called Wall of Storms, and I'm like a couple chapters into that. And a lot of it circles around this commoner who winds up like getting elevated and elevated because he is so good at seeing the talents of people that other people don't seem to really appreciate and putting them to work in a very particular way that they specifically are perfect for and leveraging that talent towards another bigger, loftier goal. And this winds up getting him into places in the world that nobody would ever have expected him to be able to access because of his humble birth. But it's just appreciating the variety of ways people can be good at things, and especially appreciating women, who a lot of his opponents wind up like kind of sunk because they don't appreciate women and the things that women can do. So Christopher is really doing that here. The fact that he is appreciating everybody the way that he is specifically looking for like how you can turn, okay, so you're not good at every type of magic, but you can look at this particular type of magic and do this specific thing. And that's not going to be something almost guaranteed that his uncle is going to expect if he tries to like breach the perimeter of the property. You know, like if you're going to be coming up against somebody who can do magic, I assume you're going to expect there to just be like wards. There's going to be big walls. There's going to be, you know, things that zap you. Really boring adult type shit. You don't expect there to be tons of like poison ivy being grown or like poisoned food being left by, or like little weird charms. That's not the shit that you're looking for. So y'all have got the advantage so much. So everyone told Christopher many different ways of divining whether a living person was present in a world. And this is what this focuses on, this chapter, is everyone gathering together and using their different methods of sight to try and discover where the pieces of Gabriel are. And it turns out, apart from Christopher, only the goddess had strong enough magic to activate them and tune them from series to series, but anyone could watch them. The rooms were soon full of tense helpers staring into globes, mirrors, pools of mercury or ink, spare sheets coated with liquid crystal, while the goddess was kept busy adjusting the various spells and making a chart in her foreign writing of the readings from all the devices. So, meanwhile, Christopher is getting like taken from place to place to supervise the work that people are doing. Now, I'm going to just for the record, I have talked before about how much I enjoy like supervising and being in charge. And that is true. It's part of why I work for myself and like own a network and don't want to work for anybody else. Also, I'm bumptious. But one of the things that everybody underestimates is you think of it as, I'm going to set these pieces into place and I need to keep the overall plan in mind. And that's how I often think of it. What it really is, jobs like this, is constantly reassuring people who are not sure of themselves or who do not have the confidence to just make a decision. And that's kind of the most difficult part, is I'll be just send people to be like, okay, will you fold these letters? And while you do that, we're going to take care of this. And then you'll think that's a very simple task, but then they'll come to you and they'll be like, do you want them folded this way or this way? Should we put the stamps on this way or should we put it on this way? How do you want them addressed? Do you want it to be in like regular black ink or do you... And every single little thing, they're looking for you to decide it, when to you, you're just like, oh my God, just fucking pick something and just do it. I just want it to be done. It doesn't matter. And Christopher is kind of getting that here, where people keep on just being like, will you come and take a look at the way we've done this? Will you come and check out how this is? Do you think that this is like, and he just has to be all over the place. And they keep asking him for help with something that takes a little bit of time. And he's never really getting the chance to settle down and do that because he's just, you know, supervising every other little thing. And it starts to calm down, but it goes on like this for a while, especially at the beginning. And it's sort of frustrating too, like as somebody who has been in this position, you think to yourself, it doesn't matter, just do whatever, I just want it done. But inevitably, somebody will make a choice that is so baffling to you. And they will do 250 letters that way. And you're like, why would you fold them vertically? Oh my God, what is this? Why would you do it this way? So at the same time as I get frustrated that people are asking for advice on simple shit, on the other hand, frequently people make stupid choices, and I have to be like, okay, I might feel like this is stupid, but if I don't take the time now to tell them how to do this, they're going to do something really fucking weird. So I better just suck it up and go and explain to them how I want it done and be really clear about it. So Christopher was halfway upstairs again when the butler came to tell Christopher that they had done all they could think of to defend the grounds. And would Master Christopher come and see? So Christopher went and marveled. The main gates and the other smaller ones were hung with curses and dripping poison. Brambles with 6-inch thorns had grown along the walls, while the hedges put Christopher in mind of Sleeping Beauty's castle. So high and thick with thorns, nettles, and poison weeds were they. 10-foot thistles and giant cactus guarded the fences, and every single weak place had been booby-trapped by the boot boy. He demonstrated, using his pet ferret, how anything that stepped here would become a caterpillar, or here would sink into bottomless sewage, or here would be seized by giant lobster claws, or here... Anyway, he had made 19 booby traps, each one nastier than the last. Christopher ran back to the castle, thinking if they did manage to get Gabriel back, he would have to ask him to promote the boot boy. He was too good to waste on boots. I love it. I love it so much, guys. I love it so much. So, again, how am I supposed to get the butcher and the baker and the milk inside? Because we have all of these defenses up. So then this requires him and the goddess to periodically go down there and pull back the spells to allow people in and then close them up again. All of this annoying little shit that you don't think of. The day-to-day life of feeding everybody and providing things for everybody still has to go on, even if you're in an emergency situation. People don't suddenly have to stop having to use the bathroom. People don't suddenly not have to eat. So I really enjoy that that's included in this, all of these little practical moments. And even things like signing the letters, and that they need to teach him the special spell so that he can sign as Crestomancy, and that his name, apparently signing it gives it some sort of power. So there's an additional spell he has to learn so that he can sign it and protect that power that's in his signature from being exploited. Just all of this stuff. And Christopher had great fun developing a dashing style of signature. Guys, listen, it's all just a little too close to home. It occurred to him then that he was enjoying himself more than he ever had done in his life. Papa had been right. He really was cut out to be the next Crestomancy. But suppose he hadn't been, Christopher thought, making another sizzling signature. It was simply luck that he was. Well then, he thought, something could have been done about it. There had been no need at all to feel trapped. So Tacroy, for his part, is still going into trances, wandering all over the place, and he and Rosalie keep on, sniping and snarling at each other. And Christopher is watching them because it says... Tacroy and Miss Rosalie were staring at each other, both making sure the other knew their feelings were deeply hurt. Who have I seen look like that before? Christopher wondered. Underneath, he could tell, Tacroy and Miss Rosalie were longing to stop being rude to one another, but too proud to make the first move. Who was this like? As Christopher bent over the pool of ink, he got it. Papa and Mama. They had been exactly the same. So that's interesting. I'm wondering if it's going to turn out that his mother and father get back together in the end because they really do love each other. Because it has seemed to me as an outsider, as a reader, that they didn't like each other at all. And they were just forced into this weird marriage. But maybe they do, maybe there was something that drew them together that's still there. So they are all dealing with this. And all of a sudden, the goddess remembers that Proudfoot, the kitten, is going to be hungry. And she summons Proudfoot downstairs. And reminder, Proudfoot had just been born when the goddess leaves her world and comes here. So Proudfoot's little eyes weren't open yet. And they do open while she's holding her. And it says, even when an ordinary kitten opens its eyes for the first time, it's a remarkable moment. Since Proudfoot was an Ashith temple cat, the effect was startling. She suddenly had a personality at least as strong as Throgmorton's, except that it seemed to be just the opposite. She was passed from hand to hand for people to take turns at cooing over her and feeding her. Flavian was so besotted with her that he would not let go of her until Tacroy came out of his trance, very dejected because he had not been able to sense Gabriel in any of the 3 worlds he'd visited. Flavian gave him Proudfoot to cheer him up. Tacroy put her under his chin and purred at her, but Miss Rosalie took her away in order to give Tacroy a strong cup of tea instead, and then spent the next half-hour doting on Proudfoot herself. Ah, I love it so much. There's a magical kitten that's supernaturally adorable. You guys, I can't handle it. I love it so much. And at this point, Christopher is taking a step back and really looking at everything. The front hall where the pentacle is that they're going to be dropping that cage over is littered with tools and, scrap wood and stuff because they're still building it. And it's taking so much longer to build than anybody had really expected. Partially because Dr. Simonson is taking this shit really, really seriously. I think Christopher had it in his head that they'd just be able to, throw something together. But Dr. Simonson, one could argue maybe he's being a little overzealous, but also they're going to be dealing with an individual who's really ruthless, like Ralph, and who also has a lot of dragon blood. So he's probably smart for handling it with this kind of focus, So finally, he gets interrupted by, I'm trying to remember, one of the gardeners says, "We don't know if it's the Wraith or not. There's hundreds of them all around the grounds." And Christopher looks into a mirror that gives him a view of the property and realizes that the arm of a Sheth is here and that they are trying to get in because of Millie, because of the goddess, or trying to get her back. They've tracked her down, which is really bad news. And they've managed to make their property strong enough that these people aren't getting in. That's not succeeding. But it is really going to be a tough thing. And Christopher lets them know that those spears are nothing to fuck with and make sure to keep people out of range of them because I got stabbed in the heart one time. Funny story. So let's see. Christopher doubled the strength of each spell as he came to it. The distant glimpses he got of silver masks and spear points made him feel ill. Meanwhile, they're still trying to get a hold of any pieces of Gabriel. And at one point, Tacroy gets really close. But it's it seems as if when he said, "Oh, he'll cry with joy to see me," right? It turns out he was a little bit more on track with what was going to happen than anybody expected. Because these pieces of Gabriel look up and see him and kind of run away from him. So they all start to just vanish when he goes after them. And it's just really not... He's able to track them down. He's able to get really close. But in the end, he doesn't look like he's going to be the one that's going to be able to pull Gabriel back together. So yeah, when Christopher offers to go, Flavian's first of all, fucking definitely not. Tacroy says, "We need you here to deal with your uncle." The goddess says, "You can't leave me here with the arm of a Sheth, plus what happens if you lose another life?" And Miss Rosalie is like, "Yeah, that's not going to happen. We can set up a guarded gate and send you through to collect them after the other lives settle, but we need to find them first." And eventually, all of this is it's just kind of at this point starting to get a little bit chaotic, and Christopher is reaching a point now where he had been having a lot of fun, and now he's starting to get a little bit flustered and a little bit panicked and a little bit freaked out, which good, he can't be this cool and collected and treating it as a game forever when the stakes are this high. So at one point, Ralph does try and get through. Throgmorton flips the fuck out, and when he turns and looks, there's just kind of a wisp of steam, and it is apparent that Uncle Ralph didn't get through, but is sort of testing it to see how much, reinforcement they have there. And then they try and get to the through the gates, but it seems as if the Wraiths and the arm of a Sheth clashed outside, and the Wraiths thought that the arm of a Sheth were people from the castle defending it, and the arm of a Sheth thought that the Wraiths were people from the castle trying to push them back, and so they wound up fighting fighting up against each other, and it says, at all events, the attackers had run for their lives. So they finally finish this lobster pot, which is what they call the huge cage that they're hoisting from the ceiling. The spell tripped just as it was supposed to, and the cage came crashing down around Christopher, because he's testing it out. And for a minute, he starts to get really freaked that he's not going to be able to move this cage, and that after this test, he's just going to be trapped in there forever. But the goddess manages to set him free, and she's like kind of giggling at him for panicking the way that he did. Why don't you come with me to collect Gabriel's lives, he said. It'll puzzle the arm of a Sheth no end if you start hopping from world to world. Oh, may I? The goddess said gladly. I feel so responsible. So they finally talk it through, and Christopher is realizing that there are a million ways that you can send people through different worlds. And Rosalie talks about, we set up a gate here in this room. There's just a lot of things, because he has traveled so much between worlds, he kind of thinks that he knows everything about it. But all it is that he's perfected his method. And there's a ton of other methods to choose from that he could use. So when it was finished, the gate looked simple indeed. It was a tall square frame of metal with two mirrors sloping together to make a triangle at the back of it. No one would know to look at it how difficult it had been to do. So they send him to Tacroy to try and collect, and you see the spirits. And then this is when Tacroy says he was telling me he could invent a better train, then he simply vanished. So they ask him to track down a different piece. And the same thing happens. Gabriel, floats away. And Flavian's tracking it all and says, can you guys look at this? All the lives seem to be disappearing. What's going on? We've no idea. All the Gabriels are disappearing. No, they're not, Flavian called excitedly. They're all collecting into a bunch, and they're coming this way, the lot of them. There was a tense half hour during which everyone's hopes and fears seesawed. Since Christopher's hopes and fears on the whole went the opposite to everyone else's, which I haven't mentioned, Christopher is low-key enjoying himself so much he kind of doesn't want Gabriel to come back. And he's really loving being able to do a bunch of sort of immature shit that it's immature, but it matters a whole lot and everybody's listening to him. And he knows that when Gabriel comes back, it's all going to go back to being super boring. So part of him doesn't really want this to succeed. And I'm kind of wondering if that doesn't have something to do with it. But let's see. What's the matter? Flavian's shoulders drooped. All the lives have stopped, he said. They're faint, but certain. They're in Series 11, I'm afraid. I think that was where the seventh life was all along. So much for our hopes. Why? Said Christopher. Nobody can get there, dear, said Miss Rosalie. She looked as if she might cry. At least, nobody ever comes back from there if they do. Christopher looked at Tacroy. Tacroy had gone pale. Paler even than when he went in a trance. He was the color of milk, with a dash of coffee in it. And that is the end of chapter 19. So then we have chapters 20 and 21 for the final chapters of the coverage. And I am very interested. I'm very excited. Sorry, Ashley, I'm sorry. I keep having the book open in front of the window of the chat, so I haven't seen this. How long has it to go until it's dropped? I'm holding off putting through some more Magician's Apprentice until I can go home and see how many pages there even are. I'll definitely commission some more of that book. Oh, are you talking about Wall of Storms? How long has it to go until it's dropped? I'm not totally sure. I think it's been at least a month since the last time I covered it. Or 3 weeks, but I think it was before LeakyCon. So it's got about a month And for those who don't know, I've opened up some slots on Saturdays because I've decided to do away with the regular Unspoiled book club because it just wasn't getting listeners. And it was a ton of work for me to like read an entire book and to find a co-host. So I decided that there has been a real shortage of time slots for people who want things covered, and that opening up time slots would be easier for people commissioning material, and it would also be good for me to earn a little bit more money, and it would cut back on me having to read an entire book within 2 weeks on top of all of the other books and stuff that I'm covering. So yeah, that's an option if anybody's interested. But anyway, so yeah, I'm really excited. I have been enjoying this book so much, and I love how like silly and childlike the solutions to things have been, but then how effective they wind up being. And I just can't wait for Uncle Ralph to get his, because he is just such a shit. There have been a lot of like garbage people in these books, specifically Dark Lord of Darkholm. You know, there's I can't remember his name now, but basically Mr. Capitalist, who's like completely exploiting this other world for his own kind of playground business. But there's something about Uncle Ralph that's more personal, and therefore he is more despicable. He's just, you know, somebody that should be giving a fuck about this kid because he's family, and he just uses everybody and exacts this really ugly, like, there's a guilt that Christopher feels for his part in it, even though he had no idea what he was doing. And I particularly hate that. Not only using people, but making them party to something really horrible that you were doing and they just didn't even know. Like, not like that's ripping their agency away from them as well. And I just hate it. So I can't wait to see what fucking happens to Uncle Ralph, and I hope it's really terrible. All right, well, I'm going to wrap up, guys. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you so much to Ashley, who has been very graceful about me fucking up this time slot, but I will be seeing you in half an hour. So I've done the reading. I'm all set. I'm ready to go. So yeah, thank you guys again. And I will be seeing you soon with the finale episode of this book. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.